Thank you for downloading this RealAgriculture podcast. Excite your crops with inputs from Excite Bio. Access nitrogen and phosphorus with Excite Bio's lineup of inoculants and ag biologicals. Since 2010, they've been helping farmers harness the power of the soil. Learn more at excitebio.ca. That's XITEBIO.ca.
Sean Haney here with RealAgriculture.com, Real Ag Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. We're at the National Association of Farm Broadcasters meeting in Kansas City, and right now we're in the Rabobank booth, and we're joined by Lance Zimmerman. Lance, how are we doing?
I'm doing great. Glad to see you here, Sean.
It's fantastic. I was saying to somebody else, Kansas City, I think, is one of the most underrated restaurant cities in the country. Like, food here is good, my friend.
Well, and especially, I'm the beef analyst. Like I told you, I only grew up, my home is an hour and 45 minutes west of here. This is what I call the barbecue capital of the world. Now, some may say it's Austin, Texas. Some may say it's Memphis, but it really is Kansas City. So,
what makes Kansas City barbecue, besides, the quality of the beef, what makes Kansas City barbecue so good?
Well, what you notice is every region of the country has a little bit different style and approach to really how they treat sauces and the type of sauces. So I would tell you that there are differences between Kansas City and Texas, but a lot of the differences come down to cooking style and quality of the beef differences. As you go to Memphis, it's more of a vinegar-based sauce rather than sweet. As you transition out to St. Louis, it's much sweeter, richer, thicker. Then you go all the way to the East Coast, more your Carolinas, your Virginias and such. It goes back to that more vinegar-based sauce. So it's more of some of those differences. At the end of the day, it comes down to preferences. But, of course, Kansas City gets it right. So,
Well put. The other common question my wife has asked me a couple times, have you seen Taylor yet? No, I've not seen Taylor.
In Buffalo.
What's that?
She's in Buffalo this week.
Okay, yeah. There you go. Okay, the beef markets, I'll tell you, are we having to recalibrate our price elasticity of demand assumptions we've made in the past? Like, prices have been very strong, and the consumer, domestically and internationally, they really haven't wavered. What's happening here?
Yeah, if there's two misses that I've had this year, it's great when you can look back on 9 months and say, this is where I was wrong, Sean. One of them was certainly how strong demand has remained. And it's easy to look back and understand some of the reasons why. I think you and I have talked about them before. When it comes to the animal protein space, when it comes to the food space, beef kind of stands out on its own. It's always been a destination item, right? And what I tell folks is, hey, think about Valentine's Day, or you take somebody out for your anniversary. The next day, you don't brag to your coworkers about the best chicken breast you ever ate, right? You talk about the steak. You talk about the Kansas City barbecue. And so when we think about that, we have seen those elasticities for protein shift over time. So that much is not lost on us. The last research that was really great research that was done happened right before the pandemic. Unfortunately, it had been about a decade since then that we'd had good elasticity research. But what it showed was the substitution effect that we often talk about, where, hey, beef prices are getting so high, they're transitioning to pork and poultry. Those substitution effects have actually weakened in the most recent research compared to in the past. But what's interesting is the income elasticity in relationship to beef has actually strengthened. So what that means is if a consumer can afford beef today, even if prices go up, as long as their income situation doesn't change, they'll keep buying beef tomorrow. Where the concern is if their income situation does change and their income drops, then their consumption of beef will shift lower at a larger degree than it did 10, 20 years ago. And so what I'm saying is, yes, beef prices have continued to inch higher as we anticipate these tighter supplies on the horizon. But the good news is, even though the consumer is more stressed economically today than they were a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, their income situation hasn't declined enough for it to negatively impact beef demand.
But we've talked a lot about inflation. Okay, so, and with that discussion has been affordability related to food costs. As a percent of the grocery spend in your average American household, beef has to be higher now in terms of that market share of that wallet, no?
It is, but one of the interesting ways to look at it is, and I did this in a past research paper, where I said, hey, let's actually, instead of talking about beef in terms of dollars, let's talk about beef in terms of how many minutes we have to work to pay for a pound of it. And what's interesting is today we're sitting there where the average U.S. consumer has to work about 9 minutes to pay for a pound of ground beef. They have to work about 11 or 12 minutes, if I remember right, to pay for a pound of choice beef, so a finished cut. That's actually about a minute of labor less on each of those items than where we were at the previous cycle highs clear back in 14 and 15, because incomes have grown over that 10-year window. Now, that doesn't mean that we're sitting here thinking about our expenses and our salaries in a 10-year window. No, we're looking at our grocery bill today compared to what it was last month or last year. But I think it does speak well to that relative income versus beef price gap and what exists there today. And what I tell people is, when you talk about inflation, when you talk about high interest rates, when you talk about buying power, consumers today are more likely to sit back and go, we're not going to be able to do that home improvement, or we're not going to be able to do that addition or that new home purchase. We're not going to be able to buy the shiny new car. We're going to drive the one we got an extra couple years. Those are more the decisions they're being forced to have as a trade-off discussion today. But within the food space, and in particular beef, there's a lot more opportunities to trade down or trade sideways without trading completely out. And the pandemic only added to that opportunity. We have food service opportunities where, hey, if all of a sudden we don't go into the restaurant, we save not only the 20% tip, but we also save the bar bill.
Yeah.
We have another situation playing out today where if we want to have a meal, but we're time crunched, so we don't have time to prepare it, every retail store around has more prepared options or heat and serve options that are high quality that are available to us. Just because of coming out of the pandemic, we created more of those options. And so I think some of that's offering opportunity today that changes that shift compared to maybe what we were used to a decade ago.
Well, I know that it's increase in price in the grocery store. Where I really notice it, because I'm on the road so much, just like you are. You eat at a lot of restaurants. You notice the sticker price in a restaurant. That is where it really stands out, and that's maybe personally where you get a little bit of that substitute effect.
Yeah, and I think that we're still sifting through who the real winners and losers are going to be as we've gone through some pretty significant menu price increases over the last several years. What you're seeing today is a significant decline in restaurant traffic, but it's not all equal. What I mean by that is, we're still seeing people that are going to quick service restaurants to grab that fast cheeseburger, to grab those chicken nuggets or whatever. They're still going to white tablecloth, but what we are seeing is less traffic in proportion relative to casual dining. And in fact, just a news headline the other day is, TGI Fridays is going through financial troubles and bankruptcies. I think that segment of the restaurant business is probably getting hit disproportionately hard because they don't have a differentiator in terms of atmosphere. They don't have an ability to spread those costs utilizing technology. And some of those challenges are certainly adding up there today.
How long do these prices last? Like we talked a lot about the cow supply, and in order to increase beef supply, you got to have good weather and you got to have good money. Well, every year's going to be different on the weather front, but we've definitely got the money part figured out. How long does this last?
Yeah, and I think that's exactly it. The money side, we're getting to see some stronger prices. Now, there's a double-edged sword to high prices. Yes, you get better revenue coming in, but now if you're confronted with the prospects of a rebuild, you have a bigger cash outlay. And so I do think that we have a math problem in the cattle business, whether you're in Canada or North America in general, where we're sitting here today. Let's talk about feeding cattle. In U.S. dollars, because that's what I'm used to, it costs $2,500 to $3,000 a head in working capital to finish a fed steer in the U.S. today. Yet, when we talk about the returns on a cattle feeding business, we're still talking about that kind of traditional 80% range is going to have a profit range of plus or minus $100 a head. So your return versus your risk is way out of balance because that $2,500 to $3,000 of working capital is double what it was just a few years prior to the pandemic. So that's a big challenge. I'm just talking feedlot there, but that same math works all the way down to the cow-calf level. Then you think about just weather going on in Canada right now. We are seeing some pockets of some drought relief here and there. I know some of our friends in British Columbia, northern Alberta, they've seen some decent rains in the last month, but there's still some extreme pockets of dryness, and that's happening in the U.S. right now. We finally have seen some recent relief over the last 2 weeks, but up to just a few weeks ago, we still had 60% of the nation's cow herd in some areas were affected by drought, where clear back in the spring, it was less than 30%. And so we're still seeing a lot of volatility in these weather patterns, a lot of spottiness. We got to have some confidence in these weather patterns that we're going to get some staying power with some precipitation so that we can invest in the next rebuild.
Absolutely, the next generation, for sure. So, okay, so that's on the rebuild part, but what these prices, are they sticky here? Or what I hate, don't say this, because you will jinx it. Do not say this is some sort of new normal, okay? I'll kick you in the shin.
Okay, fair enough. No. One of the things that I've been telling cattle producers is I'm a big fundamentalist, but also any good market analyst is a technical analyst too. And so utilizing charting and things of that behavior. I was looking back at the 10-year window that parallels best to the one we're currently in with this cattle cycle. And in particular, I was narrowing it down to the period from 2010 to 2013. And what you saw in that period of time, and really it was 2009 to 13, that 5-year window, as we came up from the Great Recession lows in 2009 and started rallying the market moved higher very quickly. And then it kind of plateaued into a trading range that was still higher, but only subtly higher from 11 to 13, that kind of 3-year window. That's very similar to what we've just gone through. We came out of the pandemic on fire and really put a lot of money back into this market coming out of the pandemic as we got the bottleneck of cattle behind us and then walked into a phenomenal demand period, right? Well, once we got to about 2021, 2022, that uptrend really tapered off. We're still trending higher, but it's a lot more subtle than the first few years of that 5-year period. Now, think back to that 11 through 13 period. What happened in 14 and 15? We had the explosive blow off top. The reason that had to happen, we needed to rebuild the herd. We took heifers finally out of the production system. We still are not taking heifers out of the production system. It doesn't matter whether you're in Canada or the U.S. The story's the same. There's not enough optimism there, and people would rather take the big check now than try to pull back on that big check to rebuild for the future. And that's unfortunately where we are. And so my message to producers is we can still see this market move higher because supplies are still drifting a little bit softer. But we're not going to get that big drop off in supply until we start pulling back heifers and keeping them on farms and ranches. We're not doing that this fall during this fall run based on everything I'm hearing. That means we got to wait until 2025 and the fall run then to really pull those heifers back and develop them for the future.
Exciting times. Lance, really appreciate it. All the best to you.
Yeah, appreciate it, Sean. Thanks for coming out.